Thrawn Janet by Robert Louis Stevenson. The Reverend Murdoch Solis was long minister of the moorland parish of Balwearie in the Vale of Dule. A severe, bleak-faced old man, dreadful to his hearers, he dwelt in the last years of his life, without relative or servant or any human company, in the small and lonely manse under the hanging shore. In spite of the iron composure of his features, his eye was wild, scared, and uncertain, and when he dwelt, in private admonitions, on the future of the impenitent, it seemed as if his eye pierced through the storms of time to the terrors of eternity. Many young persons coming to prepare themselves against the season of the Holy Communion were dreadfully affected by his talk. He had a sermon on 1 Peter v. and 8th, the devil as a roaring lion, on the Sunday after every 17th of August, and he was accustomed to surpass himself upon that text, both by the appalling nature of the matter and the terror of his bearing in the pulpit. The children were frightened into fits, and the old looked more than usually oracular, and were all that day full of those hints that Hamlet deprecated. The manse itself, where it stood by the water of Dule, among some thick trees, with the shore overhanging it on the one side, and on the other many cold, moorish hilltops rising towards the sky, had begun, at a very early period of Mr. Solis's ministry, to be avoided in the dusk hours by all who valued themselves upon their prudence, and Gidman, sitting at the Clachan alehouse, shook their heads together at the thought of passing late by that uncanny neighbourhood. There was one spot, to be more particular, which was regarded with especial awe. The manse stood between the high road and the water of Dule, with a gable to each. Its back was towards the kirk town of Balwearie, nearly half a mile away. In front of it, a bare garden, hedged with thorn, occupied the land between the river and the road. The house was 2 stories high, with 2 large rooms on each. It opened not directly on the garden, but on a causewayed path or passage, giving on the road on the one hand, and closed on the other by the tall willows and elders that bordered on the stream. And it was this strip of causeway that enjoyed among the young parishioners of Balwearie so infamous a reputation. The minister walked there often after dark, sometimes groaning aloud in the instancy of his unspoken prayers, and when he was from home, and the manse door was locked, the more daring schoolboys ventured with beating hearts to follow my leader across that legendary spot. This atmosphere of terror, surrounding as it did a man of God of spotless character and orthodoxy, was a common cause of wonder and subject of inquiry among the few strangers who were led by chance or business into that unknown outlying country. But many even of the people of the parish were ignorant of the strange events which had marked the first year of Mr. Solis's ministrations, and among those who were better informed, some were naturally reticent, and others shy of that particular topic. Now and again, only one of the older folk would warm into courage over his 3rd tumbler, and recount the cause of the minister's strange looks and solitary life. 50 years syne, when Mr. Solis came first into Balwearie, he was still a young man, a callant, the folk said, for a book learning and grand at the exposition, but, as was natural in sae young a man with nae leaving experience in religion. The younger sort were greatly taken with his gifts and his gab, but old, concerned, serious men and women were moved even to prayer for the young man, whom they took to be a self-deceiver and the parish that was like to be says ill-supplied. It was before the days of the moderates, weary fae them. But ill things are like good, they baith come bit by bit, a pickle at a time. And there were folk even then that said the Lord had left the college professors to their ain devices, and the lads that went to study with them would ha' done mair and better sitting in a peat bog, like their forebears of the persecution, with a Bible under their oxter and a spirit of prayer in their heart. There was nae doubt, anyway, but that Mr. Solis had been ower lang at the college. He was careful and troubled for money things besides the ae thing needful. He had a feck o' books with him, mair than had ever been seen before in all that presbytery, and a sair walk the carrier had with them, for they were all like to have smored in the Dale's Hag between this and Kilmackley. They were books of divinity, to be sure, or so they called them. But the serious were of opinion there was little service for sae money, when the hail of God's word would gang in the nuke of a plaid. Then he would sit half the day and half the night forby, which was scant decent, writing nae less. And first they were feared he would read his sermons, and syne it proved he was writing a book himself, which was surely no fitting for ane of his years and sma experience. Onyway it behoved him to get an old decent wife to keep the manse for him, and see to his bit dinners, and he was recommended to an old limmer, Janet MacLower they called her, and sae far left to himself as to be o'er persuaded. There was money advised him to the contra, for Janet was mair than suspected by the best folk in Barweary. Lang o' that she had a wean to a dragoon. She hadn't come for it for maybe 30 year, and bairns had seen her mumbling to herself up on Keys Lone in the gloaming. Wilt was an unco time and place for a God-fearing woman. Howsoever, it was the laird himsel that had first told the minister of Janet, and in they days he would have gained a far gate to pleasure the laird. When folk told him that Janet was sib to the deal, it was a superstition by his way of it. And when they cast up the Bible to him and the Witch of Endor, he would threep it down their thrapples that their days were all gane by, and the dale was mercifully restrained. Weel, when it got about the clachan that Janet MacLower was to be servant at the manse, the folk were fair mad wi' her and him together, and some of the guidewives had nae better today than get round her door cheeks and charge her with her that was kent again her, frae the sodger's bairn to John Tamson's twakai. She was nae great speaker. Folk usually let her gang her ain gate, and she let them gang theirs with neither fair good e'en nor fair good day. But when she buckled to, she had a tongue to deave the miller. Up she got, and there wasn't an old story in Balweary but she got somebody lope for it that day. They couldn't say a thing, but she could say twa to it, till at the hinder end the guidewives up and clawed board of her, and clawed the coats off her back, and pooed her down the clachan to the water o' Dool, to see if she were a witch or no, soam or drown. The carline skirled till ye could hear her at the hanging shore, and she foxed like 10. There was mony a guidewife bur the mark of her nice day and mony a lang day after, and just in the hettest of the collie's hanky, was had come up, for his sins, but the new minister. Women, said he, and he had a grand voice, I charge you in the Lord's name to let her go. Janet ran to him, she was fairward with terror, and clanged to him, and prayed him for Christ's sake save her frae the cummers, and they for their part told him all that was kent and maybe mair. Woman, says he to Janet, is this true? As the Lord sees me, says she, as the Lord made me, no a word o' it. For by the bairn, says she, I've been a decent woman all my days. Will you, says Mr. Solis, in the name of God and before me, his unworthy minister, renounce the devil and his works? Well, it would appear that when he asked it that, she gave a girn that fairly fritched it them that saw her, and they could hear her teeth play dirl together in her chafts. But there was naething for it, but the away or the ither, and Janet lifted up her hand, and renounced the deal before them all. And now, says Mr. Solis to the guidewives, home with ye, one and all, and pray to God for his forgiveness. And he gid Janet his arm, though she had little on her but a sark, and took her up the clachan to her ain door like a leddy of the land, and her screeging and laughing as was a scandal to be heard. There were mony grave folk lang o'er their prayers that nicht. But when the morn came, there was sic a fear fell upon a Baweri that the bairns hid their cells, and even the menfolk stood and keekit frae their doors. For there was Janet coming down the clachan, her or her likeness, nane could tell, wi' her neck thrawn, and her head on a side, like a body that has been hangit, and a girn on her face like an unstreakit corp. By and by they got used with it, and even speered at her to ken what was wrang, but frae that day forth she couldnae speak like a Christian woman, but slavered and played click with her teeth like a pair of shears, and frae that day forth the name of God cam never on her lips, while she would try to say it, but it micknae be. Them that kenned best said least, but they never gid that thing the name of Janet MacLower, for the old Janet by their way o' it was in muckle hell that day. But the minister was neither to hoard nor to bind. He preached about naething but the folk's cruelty that had given her a stroke of the palsy. He skelped the bairns that meddled her, and he had her up to the manse that same nicht, and dwalled there o' his lane with her under the hanging shore. Weel time gaed by, and the idler sort commenced to think mair lickly o' that black business. The minister was weel thochter. He was aye late at the writing. Folk would see his cannel doon by the duel water after 12 at e'en, and he seemed pleased with himself and upsitten as at first, though a body could see that he was dwining. As for Janet, she cam and she gaed. If she didn't speak muckle afore, it was reason she should speak less then. She meddled naebody, but she was an eldritch thing to see, and nane would have mistrysted with her for Balwearie glebe. About the end of July there cam a spell o' weather, the like o't never was in that countryside. It was lown and het and heartless. The herds couldn't win up the Black Hill, the bairns were ower weary it to play. And yet it was goosty too, with claps o' het one that rumbled in the glens, and bits o' showers that slocken naething. We aye thocht it but to thunner on the morn. But the morn cam and the morn's morning, and it was aye the same uncanny weather, sair on folks and bestial. Of all that were the war, nane suffered like Mr. Soulis. He could neither sleep nor eat, he told his elders, and when he wasn't writing at his weary book, he would be stravaiging o'er all the countryside like a man possessed, when a body else was blithe to keep call aben the house. Abun hanging shore, in the bield of the Black Hill, there's a bit enclosed grund wi' an iron yet, and it seems in the old days that was the kirkyard of Balwearie, and consecrated by the papists before the blessed licht shone upon the kingdom. It was a great house for Mr. Solis's, anyway. There he would sit and consider his sermons, and indeed it's a bealdy bit. Weel, as he cam o'er the waste end of the Black Hill aye day, he saw first twa, and syne fower, and syne 7 corby craws fleeing round and round abun the old kirkyard. They flew lay and heavy, and squawked to ither as they gaed, and it was clear to Mr. Solis that something had put them frae their ordinary. He wasna easy flayed, and gaed stroked up to the wars. And what should he find there but a man, or the appearance of a man, sitting in the inside upon a grave? He was of a great stature, and black as hell, and his e'en was singular to see. Mr. Soulis had heard tell of black men, money's the time. But there was something unco about this black man that daunted him. Het as he was, he took a kind of cold grew in the marrow of his banes, but up he spak for all that. And says he, "My friend, are you a stranger in this place?" The black man answered never a word. He got upon his feet and began to hurtle to the war on the far side, but he aye looked at the minister, and the minister stood and looked back, till in a minute the black man was o'er the wire rinning for the bield of the trees. Mr. Solis, he hardly kenned why, ran after him, but he was sair for jasket with his walk and the het on hailsome weather, and rin as he lick it, he got nae mair than a glisk of the black man among the birks, till he won down to the foot of the hillside, and there he saw him ance mair, gone, hap, step and loup, our duel water to the manse. Mr. Solis wasn't weel pleased that this fearsome gangrel should make sae free with Balwearie manse, and he ran the harder and wet shoon o'er the burn and up the walk. But the deal a black man was there to see. He stepped out upon the road, but there was naebody there. He gaed o'er the garden, but nae black man. At the hinder end, and a bit feared as was but natural, he lifted the hasp and into the manse, and there was Janet McClure before his e'en with her Thrawn Craig, and nane sae pleased to see him, and he aye minded sin sign, when first he set his e'en upon her, he had the same cold and deedly grew. "Janet," says he, "have you seen a black man?" "A black man?" quo' she. "Save us a', you're no wise, minister. There's nae black man in a Balwearie." But she didn't speak plain, you maun understand, but yammered, like a pownie with a bit in its moo. "Weel," says he. "Janet, if there was nae black man, I have spoken with the accuser of the brethren." And he sat down like ane with a fever, and his teeth chittered in his heed. "Hoots," says she, "think shame to yourself, minister," and gied him a drap brandy that she keeped aye by her. Syne Mr. Soulis gaed into his study among his books. It's a lang lay, mirk charmer, perishing cold in winter, and no very dry even in the tap of the simmer, for the manse stands near the burn. Sae down he sat, and thought of all that had come and gane since he was in Balwearie, and his hame, and the days when he was a bairn and ran daffin on the braes. And that black man, aye ran in his heid like the hour come of a sang. Aye, the Mary thought of the black man. He tried the prayer, and the words wouldn't come to him. And he tried, they say, to write at his book, but he couldnae make nae mair o' that. There was whiles he thought the black man was at his oxter, and the swat stood upon him cold as well water, and there was other whiles when he cam to himself like a christened bairn and minded naething. The upshot was that he gaed to the window and stood glowering at dual water. The trees are unco thick, and the water lies deep and black under the manse, and there was Janet washing the clays with her coats kilted. She had her back to the minister, and he, for his pert, hardly kenned what he was looking at. Syne she turned round, and shawed her face. Mr. Soulis had the same cold grew as twice that day afore, and it was borne in upon him what folk said, that Janet was dead lang syne, and this was a bogle in her clay-cauld flesh. He drew back a pickle, and he scanned her narrowly. She was tramping in the clays, crooning to herself. And good guide us, but it was a fearsome face. While she sang louder, but there was nae man born a woman that could tell the words of her sang, and while she lookit sidelang down, but there was naething there for her to look at. There gaed a scunner through the flesh upon his banes, and that was Heaven's advertisement. But Mr. Soulis just blamed himself, he said, to think sae ill of a poor, old afflicted wife that had nae a friend for by himsel'. And he put up a bit prayer for him and her, and drank a little caul o' water, for his heart rose again the meat, and gaed up to his naked bed in the gloaming. That was a nicht that has never been forgotten in Balwearie, the nicht of the 17th of August, 1712. It had been het afore, as I said, but that nicht it was better than ever. The sun gaed down among unco-looking clouds. It fell as murk as the pit. No a star, no a breath of wind. You couldna see your hand afore your face, and even the old folk cooist the covers frae their beds and lay peaching for their breath. With all that he had upon his mind, it was guy and unlikely Mr. Soulis would get muckle sleep. He lay and he tumbled. The good, caller bed that he got into brunt his very banes, whiles he slept and whiles he walkened, whiles he heard the time o' nicht, and whiles a tyke yowling up the muir as if somebody was dead. Whiles he thocht, he heard bogles clavering in his lug, and whiles he saw spunkies in the room. He behoved, he judged, to be sick, and sick he was. Little he jaloused the sickness. At the hinder end, he got a clearness in his mind, sat up in his sark on the bedside, and fell thinking ance mair of the black man and Janet. He couldn't weel tell how, maybe it was the call to his feet, but it came in upon him with a spate that there was some connection between the twa, and that either or baith of them were bogles. And just at that moment in Janet's room, which was nice to his, there came a stramp of feet as if men were warsling, and then a loud bang, and then a one gaed reichling round the fower quarters of the house, and then I was aince mair as silent as the grave. Mr. Soulis was feared for neither man nor devil. He got his tinder box and lit a candle and made 3 steps o'er to Janet's door. It was on the hasp, and he pushed it open and keeked boldly in. It was a big room, as big as the minister's ain, and plenished with grand old solid gear, for he had naething else. There was a fower-posted bed with old tapestry, and a braw cabinet of aik that was furrer than minister's divinity books, and put there to be out of the gate, and a wheen duds o' Janet's lying here and there about the floor, but nae Janet could Mr. Soulis see, nor any sign of a contention. In he gaed, and there's few that would have followed him, and lookit around and listened, but there was naething to be heard, neither inside the manse nor in a Balwearie parish, and naething to be seen but the muckle shadows turning round the cannel, and then o'er aince the minister's heart played dunt and stood stock still, and a cold one blew among the hairs of his head. Whatten a weary sicht was that for the poor man's een, for there was Janet hanging frae a nail beside the old eight cabinet. Her hide aye lay on her shouther, her e'en was steeked, the tongue projeekit frae her mouth, and her heels were 12 feet clear abun the floor. God forgive us all, thocht Mr. Soulis. Poor Janet's dead. He cam a step nearer to the corp, and then his heart fair whammelled in his inside. For by what cantrip it would ill beseem a man to judge, she was hinging frae a single nail and by a single worsted thread for darning hose. It's an awfu' thing to be your lane at nicht with siccan prodigies of darkness, but Mr. Soulis was strong in the Lord. He turned and gaed his ways out of that room, and lockit the door ahint him, and step by step doon the stairs as heavy as lead, and set doon the candle on the table at the stair-foot. He couldn't pray, he couldn't think, he was dreeping wi' cold swat, and naething could he hear but the dunt-dunt-dunting o' his ain heart. He might maybe have stood there an hour, or maybe twa, he minded sae little. When o' a sudden, he heard a lay, uncanny steer upstairs, a foot gaed to and fro in the charmer where the corp was hinging. Syne the door was opened, though he minded weel that he had locked it. And syne there was a step upon the landing, and it seemed to him as if the corp was looking o'er the rail and down upon him where he stood. He took up the candle again, for he couldnae want the licht, and as softly as ever he could gaed straucht out of the manse and to the far end of the causeway. It was aye pitmurk, the flame of the cannel, when he set it on the grund, brunt steady and clear as in a room. Naething moved, but the dual water seeping and sabbing down the glen, and yon unhaly footstep that cam plodding down the stairs inside the manse. He kenned the foot over wheel, for it was Janet's, and at ilka step that cam a wee thing nearer, the cold got deeper in his vitals. He commended his soul to him that made and keepit him. And O Lord, said he, give me strength this night to war against the powers of evil. By this time the foot was coming through the passage for the door. He could hear a hand skirt along the wa, as if the fearsome thing was feeling for its way. The saws tossed and mained together. A lang sigh came o'er the hills. The flame of the cannel was blown aboot, and there stood the corp of Thrawn Janet, with her grogram gown and her black mutch, with the hide eye upon the shuther, and the gurn still upon the face o't. Levin, ye what he said, died, as Mr. Soulis weel kenned, upon the threshold of the manse. It's a strange thing that the soul of man should be that thurled into his perishable body. But the minister saw that, and his heart didn't break. She didn't stand there lang. She began to move again and came slowly towards Mr. Soulis where he stood under the saws. The life of his body or the strength of his spirit were glowering frae his een. It seemed she was gone to speak, but wanted words, and made a sign with the left hand. There came a clap o' wand, like a cat's fuff. Up gaed the cannel, the saws screeched like folk, and Mr. Soulis kenned that, live or die, this was the end o't. Witch, beldame, devil, he cried, I charge you by the power of God, begone, if you be dead, to the grave, if you be damned, to hell. And at that moment, the Lord's ain hand out of the heavens struck the horror where it stood. The old, dead, desecrated corp of the witch-wife, say lang keep it frae the grave and hursled round by deals, lowed up like a brunstein spunk, and fell in ashes to the grund. The thunder followed, peal on dirling peal, the raring rain upon the back of that, and Mr. Soulis loped through the garden hedge, and ran, with skellock upon skellock, for the clachan. That same morning, John Christie saw the black man pass the muckle cairn as it was chapping 6. Before aicht, he gaed by the change house at Knockdow, and no lang after, Sandy M'Lellan saw him goin linking down the braes frae Kilmacally. There's little doubt but it was him that dwalled sae lang in Janet's body, but he was away at last, and sin syne the deal has never fashed us in Barweary, but it was a sair dispensation for the minister. Lang he lay raving in his bed, and frae that hour to this, he was the man ye ken the day. Thank you for listening. If you like our recordings, consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel so you don't miss any more audiobooks.